because the hope path has run out. The nihilists, the narcissists, the fascists, they're rolling on in. They're rolling on in. And they roll on in, history tells us they roll on in when we basically stop paying attention, we stop trying, we stop stepping up.
This podcast is recorded on the lands of the Camaragal. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Welcome to First Read. Hello and welcome to First Read, the meeting ground for big ideas. I'm your host Charle Malycon, and today we're joined by Sarah Wilson, author of I Eat the Stars. Hi Sarah, thanks for joining us today. So glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here as well, Charle.
Yes, we have lots to talk about. Sarah is a New York Times multi-best-selling author of such titles as First We Make the Beast Beautiful and This One Wild and Precious Life. Sarah is also a journalist, climate activist, practical philosopher, hiker and podcaster. She lives a wild and expansive life, which is quite possibly how she came to write this wild and expansive book, I Eat the Stars. Sarah, your dad calls this Sarah's big book of everything.
He does.
Could you possibly describe it in a nutshell for us?
Oh gosh, it's a really hard one to sort of condense into an elevator pitch, but I'll try. So essentially it's a book about how complex civilizations, like the one we live in, they become so complex that they collapse in on themselves. So every complex civilization in history, the Roman Empire, the Mayan Empire and so on, has gone through this process. And we're going through it at the moment. So what I've tried to do is explain to concerned readers, concerned people out there who are wondering what the hell is happening to the world. We have the nuclear crisis, AI threat, the tech bros are telling us that robots are going to come and kill us and take our jobs beforehand. We've got, of course, the climate crisis. We've got food and water scarcity, rare earth mineral issues, the energy crisis. We've got fascism arriving around the world, the collapse of democracy. So all of these systems are collapsing all at once. And so my book tries to explain how and why this is happening and how we as tender, vulnerable humans are meant to exist in this, and how we're meant to get on with having children and loving each other. And also it tries to pave a way forward for what comes next.
Wow, gosh, and you're right, this book
It's
does
everything.
actually cover all of that and more.
And I put it through a philosophical lens, a spiritual lens.
right.
I bring in any energy futurism models. I bring in game theory. I interview more than 200 experts from around the world, death doulas, a couple of nuns, scientists, philosophers, economists, across the board.
Look, I helped edit the Australian version of this book, and the notes section alone, the references, are quite possibly able to stand alone as their own book. So incredibly impressive research, as well as all of your incredible philosophical meanderings and musings. So it is indeed a big, big book. It is also a stunningly beautiful book. And I'm really curious as to where and how you found this amazing illustration that's on the cover.
Yeah, pretty much everything I do in my life requires a hectic wrangle. People say, "Oh, you produce these things. It looks like it's no effort."
So easy.
No, everything I do is painful. So anyway, I sat down with a friend in Paris, and we just I'd collected some imagery that really summed up the feel of what I was after, and I contacted this young Argentinian woman and just said, could I use this particular picture? I'll need to morph it a bit and add some things. I sort of joined some things up here. I took out some of the cuter kind of elements, and then I sort of, positioned everything in the right place and played with fonts and the texture of the paper and all of that kind of thing, and made the cover in a weekend, basically. Yeah.
Completely compelling. Like, why wouldn't you pick that up? And then we've got this incredible title as well, which also then just brings you in and makes you stop and think, like, hang on.
What does it mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
What does it mean? Why did you choose that as the title?
Well, it's funny because I think people, when they read it, they kind of wonder if they know what it means, but I think intuitively they do. So I generally know what the title of my book is going to be well before I've even finished researching the book. And this came from a poem I'd probably come across about 10 years ago by Rebecca Elson. She was a NASA astronaut, and she was also a poet. And she was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and she didn't have long to live, and so she wrote a book of poetry, and it was called A Responsibility to Awe. And this particular poem is called As an Antidote to Fear of Death, and the next line is, I eat the stars. And so it's this idea that when we're confronted with death, whether it's our own death, the potential death of humanity, which is what we do face today, or whether it's simply the death of the system, the death of the old normal, which we're absolutely in at the moment. When we're faced with that, it creates a certain urgency to live our life fully and joyfully and beautifully now. You know, and philosophers throughout the ages and spiritualists have written about this. You know, Montaigne, wrote that to live well, we must learn to die well. And he went as far as, practicing his death, like digging graves and just imagining his own funeral. And what he said was, if we do that, if we confront death like this, we then have to go, well, how do we want to live if we're that close to death, which all of us are at any given moment, of course, and this is the paradox of the human experience. We are aware, we're the only species aware that we are going to die, and yet we tend to live in full denial of it until we're faced with a historical moment like the one we're in. And then we have the gift to live urgently and fully.
Throughout your writing and your climate activism, despite exposing all manner of evils, from big food to big pharma to big tech, you have until now remained optimistic. Maybe we'll turn this around. You had hope. And then you open this book with a really confronting statement, which says, I am out of hope. How do we get here, and what do we do with that information?
Yeah. So I spent 3 years researching the book. And I go down into the deepest rabbit holes when I research a book, and I don't feel confident to come out of it until I've really got an emotional feel for where humanity is at with the issue, And so you can collect data, but you've also got to feel into it. And I had to go through this incredible reckoning. As you say, Charle, like I have been peddling hope. As a climate activist, you've got to give everybody something to aim for. Like, if we all switch to solar panels and EVs, we can make this, right? Yeah. But what was happening, and we're all right, we were correct in doing this because we did have a chance. There was a pathway. We did have climate targets that if we hit them, then we'd be able to kind of continue things along. But what I realised is, first of all, we'd missed the deadlines. We'd made things worse. And so I had to let go of this notion of hope. But really, I realised that a lot of climate activists, we've been deeply uncomfortable with this particular type of hope, this hope that we can preserve life as it is, right? The normal, if we can come back to normal. Like if we do all these things, then we can continue business as usual.
Preserve status quo.
Exactly. And I realised I'd always been deeply uncomfortable with that because the status quo is all about infinite growth on a finite planet. It's about more, more, more. It's about that neoliberal premise that we have to keep growing, and which basically takes us away from our humanity. So I'd always felt really itchy about that. And so, and then it all kind of was happening at the same time. I realised that the way that complex systems work is such that we can't actually go back to the old normal. Even if we did, even if the most wonderful, kind, generous, reasonable human on the world decided to became boss of the world, they could not even wave a magic wand and reverse all of this because the systems are so ingrained now. They're so well on their way that even if we kind of plugged the climate system whole, it'd spit out something out the other end. So we'd probably blow out resources or we'd blow out fertility, the fertility system or the economic system. And so that was a very big journey I had to go through. But where I landed was that in the place of hope, we can basically use truth as our ballast going forward. And I looked into the cognitive science on all of this. When we are living to a promise or to a hopeful thing that doesn't match up to what's going on in reality, we experience this incongruence, this dissonance in our brain. And it's been shown to cause a huge sort of distress and anxiety in a person and in a population. And I think that's what's been going on with so many of us. So when we actually resolve that dissonance by facing the truth of the predicament that we're in, we actually experience, and this is chapter 2, it comes straight after I say, I don't have hope, we experience relief, a cognitive relief, like, finally, I get what's going on. And once you have that relief, it creates a space for you then to step into, and now what am I going to do about it? How am I going to live my life?
Yeah, and you take us on that incredible journey, as you say, throughout the book. I was kind of terrified, and you were kind enough to preface it by saying, this is going to be hard to read. I just want to be honest with you, but hang in there with me.
Read the first 3 chapters.
If you can get to the end of chapter 3, and I say if you can get to the end of the book, actually, we go on this incredible journey with you and go through all the science and each of the elements of collapse, and then you bring us back out the other side. So stay there, reach the end. I encourage you to do that, everybody.
I do too, because the journey of writing the book has produced in me this incredible sense of relief and joy. And, the final chapter is called Homecoming. And it's certainly, I've experienced a landing into my full humanity throughout the process of this book. And, I had a journalist interview me yesterday, and she's known me for years. We worked together as journalists, I don't know, shortly after the last ice age. And she said to me, you've changed. You've changed. She said, you are a calmer person. She said, it's palpable, and it's true. My mum says the same thing. She says, I don't understand. I say this in the book. I don't understand, Sarah. You're writing about this dark stuff, but you seem happier than ever. And it really is that cognitive dissonance has been resolved. I can see what's happening now. I can see that all the patterns and cycles of life are doing their thing. And
it's meaningful and purposeful, and there's as ugly as the experience is that we're in at the moment, there is beauty to come out of
there's
it.
There's a potential. Well, there's the beauty of the work that we have to do to survive this, but and the growth that we experience, because I talk about this as a growing up experience. We're currently behaving like adolescents, and what we're going to be doing is doing this incredible stepping up into the next stage of our human evolution. But on top of this, I also believe that there's a stunning possibility. There's a stunning possibility of us actually evolving to the next stage of our evolution through this process. And it really could be way better than the neoliberal, extractivist, capitalist, destructive system that we're currently in. And I think we are craving that. We're aching for it. Children's nervous systems are telling us the way that we're living now is not right. It cannot hold, and it should not hold. And so I think the stunning possibility is that we do rise into our best selves, meet the moment, and emerge this behemoth called life to where it needs to go, which in many ways is a simplification. It's an undoing of the complexity that we've been going through, the growth. It is going to come back down the other side as a less. But that simplification, I think, could land us at a really beautiful spot.
Yeah, there is hope.
A stunning possibility.
A different hope.
Yeah.
I mean, do you worry if you sort of lead out, and I know that it's intentional, you're such a great writer and synthesizer of all this incredibly big, enormous ideas and data, but without hope, is there a danger that people are just going to descend into nihilism or hedonism and just be like, screw it, I don't have much left? Is that why you say there's a possibility of this being a new beautiful era? And do you still perhaps worry that, oh gosh, we still could, if we keep behaving the way we've been behaving, then history shows we're on the wrong track. So we have this kind of global community responsibility to turn it around, to become something
It's a really
else?
good question, Charle. I think that most people have given up hope. They're hanging on to this hopium. They're addicted to the idea that somebody else out there will fix this, right? That's not going to get us anywhere. So, yeah, I get your point that if I say there's no hope, then people might give up. But that is exactly why I've written this book, because what I'm saying is that it's a this and, yes, there's no hope, and we roll up our sleeves, and in the process of stepping up, we become the humans that we're going to have to be in the next realm. So it does the work for us. We become the something out there that fixes the problem. We become it. So I don't think we've got a choice but to go this path, because the hope path has run out. The nihilists, the narcissists, the fascists, they're rolling on in. They're rolling on in. And they roll on in, history tells us they roll on in when we basically stop paying attention, we stop trying, we stop stepping up. Hannah Arendt has written about this, the banality of evil. It's when we're not paying attention. Specifically, she says, when we're not thinking, when we're not engaging in politics and in nuanced discussion, that's when the fascists can take over.
Yeah.
That's when these horrible forces can actually step in. So, the path is to get engaged, to face the truth, get engaged, and be who we need to be so that this thing can emerge into the world that we want to be living in. It sounds very esoteric, very woo-woo, but, I do go through all the actual psychological models, but also the complex systems models, physical modelling, mathematical modelling that shows this is how change comes about.
Yeah, agree. Sarah, I know by the end of the book, you lead us through this incredibly big roller coaster of enormous ideas, crossing all the different systems, and we come out again in a place of hope in another way, hope for humanity as a solve to all of these sort of issues that are arising. But before we do that, before we get there, I think, as you say, abandon hope, look to truth. We've got to look that beast dead in the eye. So for people who are new to this idea of total systems collapse, can you just explain it briefly for us in a really succinct manner? I know you use words like metacrisis, polycrisis, that might kind of help bring that expansive notion into
it's a really hard thing to wrap your head around, because we live in a world that works to a linear way of thinking. There's neuroscientists that talk about it as a left brain way of thinking. The left hemisphere tends to see things in a linear way, a materialist way, where it's, and it works with language, it works with facts and figures and this kind of thing. It's very narrow. And the more powerful part of our brain is the right brain that can bring complex ideas into a bigger picture. It's the part of the brain that can create poetry, that can understand art, it can understand metaphor. And so we've become a very left brain dominated world. And in fact, throughout history, we have performed at our best as humans when we are right brain dominant. And the left brain comes in and just does all the admin, pushes us along.
So invert the paradigm that we're currently living.
That's it. So the left brain thinking sees things in a linear way, right? Well, we have this problem here, but if we just go along to here, then we'll fix it. And that kind of works when your society is quite simple. It's a good way to get things done, But when a system becomes super complex, right, we do need to join the complexity. We need to understand how complex systems work, because our civilization is a complex system of complex systems, and they don't exist in isolation. You can't extract, for instance, the climate crisis and talk about it as though it doesn't have impact on
economically or
on economics, on equality, on the food system, on the water system, But that is how we've been dealing with things. So complex systems theory is a far better theory for describing actually how life works. And it's how our body works, right? The thigh bone's connected to the, what is it? What are we connected to? The hip bone,
yep.
right? So it's all connected.
Yeah.
And we have a relationship with the pot plant behind you. We are interconnected, and we understand that far better now. And Indigenous cultures have operated to this way of thinking for, tens of thousands of years. It's just that the post-industrial mindset has required a linear way of going about things, a very rational, economically rationalist sort of way of going about things. So it's not something kind of new. It's something that we've kind of left behind, we've blocked. Does that give a bit of an understanding?
Yeah.
Have you got any sort of, the kinds of, the way I describe it in my book is I use a Dr. Seuss kind of illustration, those Dr. Seuss, the Lorax or Hooper Humperdinck, Not Him, where there's these kind of weird pile-ups of houses with little ladders that lead up to here, and there's staircases and vines, and it's all interconnected, and all the little creatures live on them, and I envisaged complex systems, our civilization as a Dr. Seuss image. So you have the economic system over here, and there's a little lean-to and a cubby house over here, which has the food and water system, and they're all interconnected and they're all piled up, and there's little ladders and vines connecting it all, It feeds, into itself. And all of that sits atop this little person on a bike, this engine that drives the whole behemoth above it. My brain works like this. I've got to think visually to understand a concept. And that little engine is essentially the fossil fuel system, because all of our civilization, it rests on the ability to have an infinite supply of fossil fuel industry, with fossil fuels. Without that, the whole thing comes undone. And propelling the fossil fuel, the little person on their bike, frantically pedaling along, is I have this sort of visual of a fan, and it's propelling from behind, and that fan is the growth imperative. Yeah. The more mindset. That is what powers our entire civilization since industrialization. Well, so that's complex systems in a visual.
And it is, exactly. And I love that visual. My mind works exactly the same way. That I read all the Dr. Seuss books, and I absolutely see that image, so perfectly painted.
But if you imagine that little bicyclist stops pedaling. Anyone who's ridden a bike, you know what happens when you stop pedaling?
You yourself personally.
The whole thing goes down. And that's where we're at.
Collapse theory mostly blames this growth imperative, but I think there would be people who might argue industrialization has kind of got us to this point of success where we are now. There's good healthcare, there's sanitary streets. A lot of people have been healed and fed world over due to this industrialization. So how did that go wrong? Like, how is it twisted and morphed into something that was very functional and quite useful and productive at some point into this Frankenstein kind of beast that's out here to destroy us now?
Well, it's just how complex systems go.
Yeah.
It starts out as a good idea at the time, and it did. It lifted a lot of ships, It decreased worldwide poverty. It brought a lot of comfort to a lot of the world, without a doubt. But the way that complex systems work, it's the way every complex civilization has worked. What happens is that civilizations use complexity to fix any kind of problems that emerge from the complexity, if that makes sense. And so the fixes then add to the complexity, okay? And then it all starts to exponentially dialed up, and more problems occur. So if you take the Roman Empire, it expanded, it built aqueducts and, archways and all kinds of things, right, that did great things for the people of Rome. And so then they expanded. And what that required was to sort of set up and build new cities at further and further afield, right? And then you had to send more army forces to these cities that were further and further away. So you're creating more complexity, and by trying to fix the issues, you create more and more complexity. And then what that does is you need more taxes to pay for all of this. And so you need the farmers to produce more stuff to pay the taxes, but then you get hit with a drought. And the precarity of such a complex system means that you can no longer fix the problems that the complexity is causing. So that's how it happens. We start off with the best of intentions, and I use the example in the book of watching my 4-year-old niece in her bedroom. And I was just hanging out, sitting with her. She was yapping away and she was just making this mess. And I was watching it get worse and worse. And there was craft projects and bits of wool and her brother's Lego and wet socks and outfits just everywhere. And it was a beautiful, creative explosion. That's what humans do, beautiful, creative explosions, And her dad came in and said, right, Milena, time to clean up your bedroom. And she looked at the mess, she looked at me, and she was just horrified. There was absolutely not a chance in hell she could clean up her bedroom, because that is the human species. We are that 4-year-old. We can make a hell of a mess out of things with good intentions, good, creative, beautiful intentions, but we don't know how to clean it up.
And we don't have the bat phone to Mary Poppins. So
we don't.
We're in trouble.
Yeah. So a lot of people go, but, industrialization's been great. And yeah, it has. And I'd also just make a bit of a nuanced distinction here. Progress is wonderful. Yeah. Humans are always going to want to grow and expand, right? And that's a beautiful, wonderful thing. But it's not the same as growth. Right.
Or that growth imperative that's driving this sort of post-industrial capitalism.
Yeah. Often progress requires doing less. Often progress requires sufficiency and austerity to be able to perhaps, have more equal conditions. Growth ignores all of that. And so that's what I sort of often counter when people hit me with that question, you know?
I'm glad I asked you that question, because I feel like it will come up a lot, and there are people who don't want to know. And if there's a decent understanding and explanation of, I recognise all of this and the positivity that some of this has brought, but actually we're at a different point in time too now.
And look, the world can no longer operate in absolutes. Yeah. We've got to operate in yes and.
Yes and.
Multiple truths happening at once, So, and the other thing I would just add to that is that we have all grown up in the neoliberal system. We think that capitalism and the growth imperative is how things should be.
Yeah.
And I think it is hitting a lot of people that, it's a myth. It's a cult. I called it in my last book, this One Wild and Precious Life. I referred to capitalism as a cult. And I got a lot of pushback, but I think with the release of this book, I think people see it.
The issue here seems to be there are multiple systems collapsing at once. Work, food, the economy. We see it on the news every night. Obviously, we can't ignore it. There's a fuel shortage. AI is coming for our jobs. We're at war. I mean, literally, the world is in flames as we speak. But you started writing this book 3+ years ago. How were you so prescient to foresee it? And did you expect that it was going to get this bad this quick?
To the latter question, no, I didn't. Although to be honest, I did think that there'd be other systems that would be collapsing around about now. And, I think the British or the UK, the British Army chief, he did predict 2.5 years ago that we would be entering World War III in 3 years' time. So, give or take. So there's quite a number of systems that can be modelled. Fertility collapse was predicted for around about 2060. It's going to hit sooner. So there's a number of systems where I think they were forecast to start to collapse probably in 10 to 20 years from now. It's all been brought forward. And that was always a possibility. But how did I sort of pick up on it? I guess it's the information's all there, but it's complex. And these discussions are happening, but in rarefied academic circles or in weird as hell spiritual circles. There are people and, sort of energy futurist circles. I would argue that insurers around the world have known this for a very long time. So the knowledge has been there, but because it's complex and because we operate with so many cognitive biases that protect us from this kind of overwhelming information, it just hasn't surfaced. It was never going to surface until things got bad enough. But to answer the question, and it's not something that I put in the book, I was also in this process a little before writing the book, diagnosed with autism. And I only say this, I choose not to take on the diagnosis just because I don't feel at my age it helps a great deal. But the one thing that it did assist me with is in answering that question, because a lot of women with autism tend to be activists. And the reason for that is because autistic women in particular have acute pattern recognition abilities. So they can see things start to line up potentially in advance of other people. And that's why Greta Thunberg, Australia's Grace Tame, they see certain patternings and they see injustices emerge and they cannot let it go. They'll forego their own safety to basically doggedly work to point out a pattern emerging. So that's a long way of explaining that. I think that's what goes on. I think that I was only observing some patterns starting to emerge, and I just looked a bit deeper, found the information, and I've just put it together in one book.
Well, it's interesting because part of that process for you, and using your superpower, is that to make sense of things, to kind of, you see the pattern, you see the data, you think, oh, hang on, what's going on here? And then you have historically then taken a deep dive and really interrogated what's going on and really got to the bottom of it.
And I can't stop until I understand it. And it's a blessing and I can tell you it's a curse at a personal level. But I quit sugar. That was it. I was seeing some patternings happening with health diagnosis, the rise in certain types of metabolic diseases. I was also seeing the way that big sugar was having an influence in Parliament. I started seeing little things and I started, digging and, a behemoth was born.
Led to something like 11 ebooks, 6 or 7.
Oh, God, you've done your research.
Oh, well, I've grown up alongside of you, so I've seen all of it and kind of followed the trajectory. So absolutely.
Yeah, it's complex stuff that can look like a swirl,
Until someone like you comes along and says, actually, there is a pattern here. Yeah. Let me lay it out. Let me see what and how to make sense of this. And you did it for this book in particular through Substack initially.
Yes.
So as you were discovering this information and kind of reading the news stories and then going deeper into the data, you were sharing that with your Substack community and creating this open sort of dialogue, which was a really interesting process. And then adjacent to that, you were running your Wild with Sarah Wilson podcast and interviewing amazing minds. At what point did you think, oh, this might become a book?
When my agent suggested it. Because, so I thought that this was information that was too dangerous for publishers to take on and see commercial viability in. So I decided to do it as a serialization. And that was something that a lot of so-called dangerous, contentious books did, in the past. So Lolita, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, War and Peace, most of Virginia Woolf's books, Dickens, they were all written as serializations, just a chapter at a time, apart from anything else, and enabled a difficult, dangerous, contentious writer to earn a living while they were putting the book together. And that's what I decided to do. But it was also the perfect way, it was the perfect forum or the perfect way to write the book because it became thoroughly emergent. That's what complex systems theory basically teaches is that change occurs in an emergent kind of hive mind fashion. And so I realized this sort of partway through writing the book Serialization that the 65,000 subscribers I have, we were doing the emergent hive mind thing, It was really appropriate. But then of course the world caught up, didn't it? The world it all became a self-referring phenomenon. And so by the time I finished the book, Trump had been voted in and Los Angeles had the wildfires, and it was happening around the same time over our summer. And so publishers were apparently looking around for a book
someone to make sense of it.
That could make sense of it. Yeah. And I stepped in.
Well, you had it ready. Here we are ready to go. I mean, what was that process like then, taking a very alive, squirmy, contentious, ongoing dialogue conversation and then having to turn it into this fixed book format, which is stuck now as it is and for longevity, but is that a process of and unto itself? How does that work?
That's a very, very insightful question, because it was really hard to be able to, because since then, while the book's been, with people like you being editors,
Sorry, I worked as quickly as I could.
The printers and the lawyers and the, fact checkers, God, it's all sped up even more. And I'm like, please get this book out. So it's... My American publisher, Amy, said to me, Sarah, a book's only ever recording a moment in time. And she said, when you do publicity and podcasts like this, you can then take out the more agile message, So,
wise woman.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that the book, I don't try to peg the book to too many material things. I use them to give examples, but I hope that around about 80 to 85% of the book is theory and philosophy and spiritual insights that should stand the test of time.
Well, and you do absolutely draw on, literally centuries of writing. So, of course, we have the current information and what's happening right now as the examples, but then you go right back to philosophers and theorists and thinkers from all ages and all stages. So when people do finally accept the inevitability of collapse, I imagine the question of survival then comes up. So should I be stockpiling? Should I be survivalist prepping, buying a block of land with my mates, building a shelter? Should I just party like it's 1999 and screw the future? What do we do? Actually, once we've gone past the denial and we've faced the beast head on and this is really happening, what do we do?
Yeah, well, I'm going to start with the prepping thing.
Yeah.
So a lot of people ask me that question. Yeah. They think, should we be stockpiling tins of corn and buying some property outside a major city and, getting a bit of a group together? To which I say, only if you're prepared to defend your stockpiled tins of corn and, toilet paper or what have you. And are you prepared to defend it with a gun and violence? And what about if the neighbour's kid comes around starving? And, I went down that sort of train of thought and I thought, absolutely no way, because that would be denying my humanity. Nothing is worth that. And so, again, this collapse process gets us to wrangle and reckon with what it means to be human, what is our humanness about. So apart from that, all the studies show that this kind of homesteading or self-sufficiency doesn't work. You've got to have at least 50 to 100 people, and so, several dozen families working together to be able to produce enough food for, to be viable. So you can't do it on your own. So let go of that idea. The studies show that the best way to survive any kind of collapsing system is to cooperate and to be in community. So if you want to know what to do right now, whether you're living in an apartment in a busy city, if you're sharing a group house, whatever you might be doing, basically form bonds with the people around you. That's step one. Yep. Then start to develop skills, share what skills you have, bake muffins for your cranky neighbour, push through any kind of barriers, and then get a group together and start talking about these kinds of things, So you might be really good at, fixing things. Somebody else is good at growing tomatoes on their balcony. All of this is going to matter. And join community food groups and food growing co-ops, this kind of thing. Make it as local as possible, because one of the first things that's going to go down is trade routes and those kinds of...
Which we're seeing now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we saw it in COVID as well.
Yeah.
So the more that we can actually cross-pollinate where we are, so start where you are.
Yeah.
There's no need to go off and do something yonder. In fact, it's not going to work that way. Other things that you can do is really steady your nervous system. So if you are someone who's open to this information, and I'm really going to emphasise not everyone is ready for this information, and so we shouldn't force it upon people. They'll get there. Yeah. They're going to have to get there as their nervous systems and their cognitive processing can handle it.
Yeah.
So if you're somebody who gets it, you're ready to sort of face this truth, then get your nervous system steady, because we're going to have to form what I call, and Meg Wheatley, another collapse expert, calls islands of sanity. Because the main thing that is likely to determine whether we get through this or not, whether we pass through the collapse of the system and move on to a new, kinder, more human system, and we don't destroy humanity and everything else along the way, it's going to be determined by whether we can handle our shit.
Yeah.
And I say, we've got to calm the farm.
Yeah.
So get your nervous system steady, get yourself almost grown up.
Zen-like.
And fortify yourself. Do as Montaigne said, and imagine your own death.
Yeah.
Face it, so that as stuff starts to descend and get
Fall
real,
apart.
the sting is gone. The sting is not there.
So that's why you practice dying or practice your death, so that
your nervous system is okay with it.
A bit like a pro athlete preparing for a race, where they're like, if I imagine myself doing this enough times, I might get there.
Yeah.
If I imagine myself dying, then I'm not terrified by it. Now I can face
handle
the living, which is
liminality,
exactly what he says. Yeah.
and I can handle the liminality, and then I also have the urgency, presented to me, and therefore I must live now. So they're the kind of the things. But what I'll look into the science on actually what works to get your nervous system steady.
Yeah.
Dance. Now, I was never somebody who could dance, and sure as hell I could not do it in public. But I've realised my body needs it. And in fact, throughout history, in times of trauma and terror, humans have danced. So monks have reported travelling through Europe during the Black Plague, and came across villages where there was only 10% of people still living, and they were dancing in almost this kind of ritualistic, obsessed way. In the French Revolution, it was the same. After all the bourgeoisie had been beheaded, people danced and they mocked people being beheaded.
As a way of shaking off the...
Totally, that's it. Vietnam War, the year the Vietnam War, disco started. It only lasted 4 years, but it was literally a sort of a intuitive shaking off therapy en masse.
Move the body.
And I'm seeing everywhere people joining intuitive dance classes, ecstatic dance classes. So go and dance is another thing, and then go into nature. And everybody's been saying this for years, including me. My last book, was all about walking in nature and what it does to our nervous system. But I'll add this element to it. It also teaches you how complex systems work. You see that everything is connected and everything is as it needs to be. The fractals of nature are incredibly soothing because we see that we're part of this same patterning. We realise we belong to this. We realise we can't fight it. I say this line a lot: nature bats last. It always will. So all of our efforts to produce robots that are going to take care of this and take all of our jobs and all of this kind of... Nature's going to step in. If it is not congruent with the natural rhythms and cycles of life, it will not last. So go into nature and just be with that truth.
So that is a fantastic place to finish. I know you and I could talk about this book for literally decades. We've only just scratched the surface, so I would encourage everybody to pick up your own copy of I Eat the Stars. Thanks, Sarah, for coming.
I've enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
And thank you for listening. I Eat the Stars is published in Australia and New Zealand by Penguin Random House and is available where all good books are sold. Remember, if you're ever stuck and in need of a boost, first read.